Good evening, everybody. Happy Wednesday evening, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Bay State After Hours. So we've been getting a lot of questions lately about the possible hay shortage that be coming up. We actually have seen it happen already at our own store. So we know it could be a little bit concerning, especially for people who have horses or goats, and you definitely need that forage for their diet. So we figured for this episode, we will talk about the possible hay shortage and other alternatives. So with us today, we have Dr. Tanya Cubitt.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Hi, thank you for joining us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Pool and Grain?
So I am Dr. Tanya Cubitt. I am originally from Australia and now I reside in Culpeper, Virginia, and I have a small farm. And I came over here from Australia in 2001 to do a master's and PhD in equine nutrition. And I was never meant to stay. And now, I'm still here and I work with Performance Horse Nutrition. And we are an independent nutrition consulting company, and we really work with feed companies all around the world. And in the Northeast and down the East Coast, we work with Pool and Grain, and Pool and Grain is based out of Vermont. Um, and we, as Performance Horse Nutrition, help to formulate their equine feeds and provide support to all of their equine partners. So, we thoroughly enjoy working with Pool and Grain because one of the main reasons is their value of education, and you can see that from their dealers. And I'm just so excited that you're doing this tonight because the hay shortage is definitely a topic that we get a lot when we're mingling with folks. So great topic.
Yeah, and it's a really scary situation, especially for horse owners at the moment. Um,
Yeah, and
so,
there's the whole hay shortage, or do I even if I have enough hay, is it good quality, or do I need to find better types of forage to feed my horse? So all of these topics we'll try and address tonight.
Perfect. So obviously, anybody, if you have questions during Dr. Tanya's presentation, feel free to put them in the comments. And each section will break up a little bit and take one or two questions. Also, I'll be putting in the comments the link on how you can enter to win one of 3 free bags of Pool and Grain we'll be giving away tonight. So Dr. Tanya, I'm going to let you take over with your presentation. And let's see. Perfect.
Awesome, awesome.
And I'll let you be.
Fantastic. Okay, yes. And so if you have questions as we go through, write them in the chat box and we'll keep up with them and we'll answer them when we have our little intermission breaks. So I really always find that it's the most important when we're trying to fix a problem, whether it be hay shortage or whether it be metabolic syndrome or obesity or hindgut distress. Whenever there's a problem, we have to understand what is correct and what is right for horses in order to know what we're trying to go back to. Um, there's no point in trying to fix a laminitic horse if we don't know what we're going back to, or we're trying to discuss a hay shortage when we don't know, well, why do horses need hay in the first place? So I like to talk a little bit about digestive function, forage requirements, why it's so important, how to get the hay that you might have available to you tested, and what are we looking for in that test, because that really then forms the foundation of your feeding program. From there, based on what you have available to you, how much and what quality it is, we will build some diets and show you what you can do. So I always like to start with this, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking to a group of veterinarians or a group of 4-H pony clubbers. We always want to talk about what is normal for horses. Horses are a fiber-based animal. They eat a wide variety of forages and they graze continually. They're going to usually graze for about 17 hours out of the day. They move around while they eat. Horses are herd animals and they actually eat from the ground. So horses have a long neck for one reason only, and that's so that they can reach to the ground without laying down. Because remember, there are two types of animals. There are fight animals like a lion or a tiger, and there are flight animals, animals that can run away from danger. Horses are flight animals. So in the wild, they would stand up to eat. They even sleep standing up, to be honest, so that they can run away quickly from any type of predator. So that's why they have a long neck. So they're really meant to eat from a position of the head being as low as possible. This increases drainage of the respiratory tract. So there's mucus constantly building up in the respiratory tract, and that's flushing out all the pollen and toxins that they're inhaling, the dusts. So putting their head down on the ground will drain that out. It also increases chewing time, um, and it maintains correct teeth alignment. When they put their head down on the ground, the bottom teeth line up more correctly with the top teeth. Unfortunately, or fortunately, on the right hand side, that graphic of that horse standing in a beautiful stall, well bed, he's probably got a heat lamp, um, is more common of what we do today. And so that horse, he lives till he's about 30, whilst the wild horses maybe live till 7 to 12. So our horses are living a lot longer, but as they live longer, they can develop more disorders, and there's a lot more management that goes into them. And in order for them to live a lot longer, we seem to have gone towards a more cereal grain based diet, and we've gone away from high forages, and that can be a little detrimental for them. So we want to go back to those higher forage type diets, even in the the face of a forage shortage. We need to find ways to give it to them. The other thing that you'll note in that graphic is where the feed bucket is hung. It's hung around chest height or just slightly lower than chest height. And that's completely anatomically incorrect for a horse. So we like to put the feed as close to the ground as we can, within reason. Of course, if it's an old horse that has really arthritis in its neck, then you can't do that. But as best you can, let's like try to get the feed as close to the ground as possible. When a horse is out in a field constantly grazing, they will graze about 60,000, they will chew about 60,000 times a day. When we put them in a stall and we feed them, what we think is an appropriate amount of food, 1.5% of their body weight in hay and anywhere from 6 to 12 pounds of grain, they're only going to chew that whole, hay and grain portion about 30,000 times. So we've cut in half the amount of chews. When a horse chews, obviously they're wearing their teeth, so they're increasing dental wear, but they're also producing saliva, and saliva buffers the stomach acid, which is a really critical part in the normal digestive function. So if we look at just how many jaw sweeps, we call it, or chews a horse will do. When you take 2 pounds of grain and you put it on the ground in a tub, they'll chew that about 1,000 times. And if you take 2 pounds of long stem hay and you put that on the ground, they'll chew that about 2,000 times. But let's say we take 2 pounds of that grain, sweet feed, oats, whatever it may be, and we put that at chest height, they'll only chew that about 350 to 500 times. So you're significantly decreasing the saliva production, which then plays into the uh, poor saliva production and choke issues, and also buffering the stomach acid. So, as you can see here, if you talk about choke in horses, if I was choking, I wouldn't be able to breathe because my windpipe and my food pipe are the same thing. But in the horse, they're separated by the soft palate, which is in the back of the throat, kind of where the throat latch would go on your bridle. And how it should work is when they're breathing, um, that closes over, and then air can go through their nose and down their trachea. And when they're eating, it will actually, when they're eating, it will close, and that food will be able to go down their esophagus. And so, what we want to make sure is when we put the food closer to the ground, it increases chewing so that they will produce more saliva, because saliva helps to buffer and lubricate the throat so that they don't choke. The problem with horses when they choke is that they can actually cough and cough to try and dislodge that and then aspirate that. So putting the food on the ground slows down their rate of intake because it increases chewing and increases saliva production. If we get to the stomach, and I know, we're supposed to be talking about forage, but we really need to get a bit of an overview of the digestive system first. The stomach is very small in relation to the rest of the digestive tract. It's cut into two sections. The top section I call the non-protected region. The fancy name is the squamous mucosa, and the bottom section is the glandular mucosa, which is dark pink. And that protected region in the bottom of the stomach I say it's protected because there's a slippery, slimy mucus coating that protects that tissue. There are little cells down in that tissue that secrete acid continually, because remember, the horse is meant to be continually eating. That's how he's anatomically evolved. And so the acid is continually secreted by these little cells, And that's part of the digestive process. We're going to break it up with our teeth, and then we're going to mix it with saliva, and saliva is going to help you swallow it, but it's also got some digestive enzymes. It's going to go into your stomach with its acid, and that's going to continue to break down the food. But unfortunately, a lot of our horses are meal fed, and so the acid builds up and splashes up onto the top region of the stomach. Now, the other thing forage will do when you feed a horse forage is it will actually sit on that acid and form a physical mat or a barrier that will stop that acid splashing. Now, something that we've done with the pool and grain feeds recently is add a new form of calcium, call it calcite, and it's a marine derived calcium. And that marine derived calcium, if you look at it under a microscope, it has a honeycomb structure. So it's much more efficient at buffering that stomach acid because there's now a lot more surface areas that acid will touch the calcium, and that calcium is a base and versus the acid. If we go back to high school chemistry, and the two will neutralize each other. So that form of calcium is very, very effective at buffering that stomach acid. About 90% of horses have gastric ulcers, and about 60% have them in the hindgut, and about 50% have them in both regions of the stomach. Things that cause gastric ulcers, and it is one of the most prevalent problems in our performance horses today, are meal feeding, fasting, not feeding them enough roughage or hay, and then other things that we can't control, like riding them, stabling them, transporting them, or they get injured and we put them on a course of bute. Long-term use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs can wear away at that mucus coating. This is a quick little research study. It wasn't a quick research study, but I'll quickly go through it, where they actually looked at the pH or the acidity of the horse's stomach when they weren't feeding them any hay or grain. They're only allowing them to drink water. So the horse swallows this little meter, and it's going to show the acidity. And you can see that there's a yellow line across the screen. And anything above that yellow line, which is a pH of 4, is considered buffered, healthy, and it's not going to cause any damage. But below that is bad. And so these horses, within 1 hour of not having any food to eat, the acid in the stomach was down to between a 1 and a 2. That's really strong acid. And we know that that's very possible because it from the last mouthful of food your horse takes, whether it be hay or grain or whatever it is, 30 minutes later, that could be through the stomach. Now, it's going to sit in the small intestine and the large intestine for a lot longer, but it will be out of the stomach in as little as 30 minutes. And so within an hour, that stomach acid can be really, really strong. By 18 hours, these horses had bleeding lesions. But what is probably more in the realm of possibility with our horses is within just 6 hours, the horses had reddening of the stomach lining. What is reddening? It's inflammation. And so inflammation is the start of those gastric ulcers beginning. And what's not uncommon, especially in the winter months when our horses are heavily reliant on us for their fiber requirements, but it's cold and it's dark and we're feeding our horses at 5 at night and they're done their hay by 7. So 30 minutes later, everything's out of their stomach and we're not coming back till 6, 7 in the morning. That's a 10 to 12 hour window where they have nothing to eat. So we're really pushing the envelope, and horses will start to chew the stall, they'll start to chew bedding because they're really trying to just buffer those stomach. Uh, so you can see how easy it is for a horse to develop stomach ulcers if they don't have enough hay. And I'm showing you all this because we have a tendency to, when we don't have a lot of hay, we're rationing, and so we might not feed as much as we would like to. But I'm showing you some of the pitfalls that we can fall into if we don't feed enough forage. So why it's really important to find other alternatives. What can you do for ulcers in general? Well, adding alfalfa to the diet will really help because of that calcium. I mentioned that the pool and grain um, E-Tech feeds now all contain the calcium, the marine derived source of calcium called calcite, which is much more efficient at buffering stomach acid. But also feeding small meals often and making sure they have something to chew on more frequently, and really not allowing them more than 2 hours, a 2 hour window with nothing to chew on. If we move then to the small intestine, it's like a big long garden hose. If you lay it on the ground, there's no bacteria here or acid. It's enzymes now that are breaking down the food. We've got a 30 to 40 minute to 3 to 4 hour window of time for food to pass through the small intestine. And we know here we're going to have sugar and starches being broken down. And the reason why we know that is there's an enzyme in the small intestine called amylase, and it's primarily responsible for breaking down starch. This is another reason why we know not to feed the horses large grain meals, especially if we're having to feed those starchy meals let's say we have horses that need to go fast. They need that sugar and starch for that quick release energy, but we need to make sure that we're not feeding too much of it in a single meal. I don't like to feed any more than say 3 to 5 pounds of grain in a single meal because number one, it will just flow through the digestive system very quickly and be inefficient. But it will also, if it's high in starch, that amylase will get used up and then we'll have undigested starch going through to the hindgut of the horse, causing all kinds of problems. So from here on back, the rest of the digestive system is called the hindgut of the horse. It's just like the foregut in a cow is the rumen, and that's where all the fermentation occurs. But in the horse, it happens in the latter part of their digestive system. So there's bacteria and microbes and young fungus and yeast and even viruses and protozoa all living here in the hindgut of the horse. And we call that collectively the microbiome. And it's so very, very critical. The microbiome is what fuels your horse. It's what controls pretty much everything in your horse is this colony of different types of microorganisms, and we need to make sure that we keep it healthy. And the way we keep it healthy is to feed it of diverse and wide varieties of fiber and plenty of fiber. But the first part of the hindgut is the cecum, and it's like a blind sac. Right? It's a balloon. The entry and exit point is the same door, so it's really easy for stuff to get backed up in there or gas to build up. The next part that I've got highlighted here in blue is called the large colon, and a byproduct of this microbiome and this bacteria when they're breaking down fibers that they can create gas, and so it's very easy for pockets to build up and for it to twist and turn on itself, and that's how we would develop gas colic and pain, and the worst case scenario would be if those twists caused a torsion where the actual intestine would twist enough that it cut off the blood supply. um, we also know that these bacteria, when they're breaking down fiber, they create heat. So in the wintertime, when you're trying to keep your horses warm, feed plenty of fiber. And at that point, it doesn't actually have to be very digestible fiber. Some more stemmy fiber would be good because the harder they have to work to break it down, the more heat that they create. An issue that we have in the hindgut. So we talked about stomach ulcers. We've all probably been around a horse with a stomach ulcer and know that their behavior changes and it can be, we saw how small the stomach was, but the behavioral changes in the horse is drastic. Now take the large colon, which was huge, and put lesions all over this. So you can see we have intermittent colic symptoms. They'll get lethargic. Some will lose a lot of weight. Now we have good and bad bacteria that reside in the hindgut. So now if we have these open lesions, we could get a fever from those bad bacteria. This tissue is meant to be absorbing water, and if it's not absorbing water, then the horse will have diarrhea and they'll be dehydrated. It's much more difficult to determine hindgut ulcers because in with the stomach ulcer, you can stick a camera down their throat and have a look inside, but with hindgut ulcers, you're really relying more on symptoms and maybe if it's bad enough, changes in blood work. We recommend that you feed pelleted or cubed sources of forage, very highly digestible sources of forage, for about 2 to 4 weeks, so that we can try and correct some of that damaged tissue. If you have access to spring grass, especially because it's so high in moisture, you could allow them to graze small amounts. Uh, while the calcium will help with the stomach acidity, it will not help in the hindgut. So adding something like yeast can help stabilize hindgut pH, and the pool and grain feeds have yeast extract in them that will help stabilize, feed those bacteria in the hindgut and stabilize the good bacteria so that they can maintain a healthy acidic a healthy acidity and not get too acidic in the hindgut. Also, we know that omega-3 fatty acids, in particular DHA, which comes from your fish or algal sources, your marine derived sources, can help decrease inflammation. The small colon is the last section of the digestive system, and really all we're doing here is sucking more moisture out of that non-digested food materials and forming fecal balls. So before we move any further, um, Kevin, are there any questions that have popped up so far, or are we free to move on?
Yeah, so we did get one question. It's a two-parter.
Sure.
So Lori wants to know. She said that she soaks her feed. Um, she feeds beet pulp, and do you think it's sensible for them to use a water with a higher pH level rather than their well water? Or is there something that they can add to increase the pH level?
Um, when it comes to the pH of your water, really don't worry about it at all. Unless you're feeding your horse straight acid and you wouldn't drink it yourself, then I would not be concerned about just feeding them well water. I wouldn't be going out and buying alkaline water or anything like that. It's really not going to make a huge difference at all. So I would just use your well water. And soaking your feed is great. It adds to the hydration status of your horse. It's especially great when we change seasons, especially when we're going from summer to fall or fall to winter, when we see a shift in the moisture content in the environment anyway, and we run the risk of impaction colics then. So I would not worry about your well water. I would just use it.
And then another question somebody asked is the information that's coming up going to be applied towards goats as well? I'm assuming the hay shortage, probably same idea, but
Same idea. I'm going to give you values for horses. Um, but yes, I think that you can use the same principles with your goats as well. Now, remember, goats are more of a rumen fermenter, so they can tolerate, let's say, stemmier, stalkier fiber that may not be great for your horse if it's a harder keeper. But yes, you can apply the same principles. Absolutely.
perfect. Yeah, looks like that's all the questions. So we'll
Fantastic.
get back into it.
Keep on moving. Okay, so let's talk about forage requirements and why forage is so, we've talked about the digestive system and the actual anatomy of the digestive system, and it's really set up to 65% of the digestive capacity is petitioned towards digesting fiber. So it's absolutely critical. But most of us don't have the benefit of pasture. We rely on hay. Well, there are some other great things that we get from pasture. They can exercise, manners, socialization. Um, but you've got to be careful, especially this time of year, thinking, oh, I've got a little bit of pasture out there. A horse needs to consume, anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight in dry matter per day. The spring grass right now is 80% moisture. So 20% of what they're eating is counting towards that 20 to 25 pounds of actual dry feed. So they have to eat a heck of a lot of pasture right now in order to supply them with all of the fiber that they need. So if you feel like, oh, I'm cutting back on the hay because I don't really have a lot of hay after the winter time, and I'm not feeding a lot of grain because I've got plenty of pasture. Remember that the pasture is 80% water right now. The other um, thing, that kind of rule of thumb that we use, is in order for a horse to have enough grass to graze, they need to be out there for 17 hours out of the day. But it also, the rule of thumb is 2 acres per horse, and that 2 acres needs to have about 75% good plant coverage. So it can't look like the bottom picture, um, and it can't be those 3 horses on 2 acres. So take that into consideration. If your horse is losing a bit of weight and you think, oh, but there's plenty of grass out there, it's primarily because it's a lot of water. We know that forages, pasture is unreliable, whether it's drought or seasonality. I'm not going to rely on pasture in Vermont in the middle of winter. So also, we tend to have facilities where, maybe they only have 10 acres, but they have 50 horses. So it's just impossible for everybody to have their two 2 acres. So the absolute bare minimum would be 1% of body weight, and I don't recommend that any horse eats that little amount. For a 1,000-pound horse, that's 10 pounds of forage. If I have a horse on a weight loss program, I'm going to feed them 1.2% of their current body weight. So let's say he's 1,100 pounds and he should be 1,000 pounds. I'm going to feed him 1.2% of 1,100 pounds, and that that will be his weight loss program. Typically, though, our horses should get anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 pounds of dry forage. And you can pretty much say that that's a pound for pound replacement with hay. So if we're just feeding hay, we're feeding 15 to 25 pounds of hay because hay is 99% dry matter anyway. So let's just call it 100%. But you can't do that with pasture. If they don't eat enough hay, these are some of, or fiber in general, these are just some of the issues. We talked about the hindgut ulcers, colic, we talked about gastric ulcers, these other stereotypic behaviors like cribbing and wood chewing and behavioral issues such as weaving and aggression. These all can crop up. And even if then you start to feed them enough hay, they can become learned behaviors. It becomes very challenging when if we have enough hay, but we're then trying to extend meal time because we're working and we're going out to the barn and we're throwing them hay, and then we're leaving for the rest of the day to go work to earn money to pay for all of this, and then we come home in the afternoon and we feed them again. Um, or they're at a boarding stable and the feeding protocol is 7 a.m. in the morning and 5 p.m. at night, and then we've got this huge window of time overnight, and maybe they don't have access to pasture during the day. So we have to work out ways to extend that hay, whether we're using a slow feed hay net. Now, a slow feed hay net, it's only a slow feed hay net when the size of the holes, the openings, are less than an inch in diameter. um, there are a whole slew of different um, free kind of project ideas on Pinterest if you want to make your own slow feeder. The one on the right, it's actually a piece of metal mesh that sits on top of the hay and floats down. And I actually put that one there as one that not to do, because what I have found over the years is that um, that metal, horses trying to nip on that metal, they'll actually wear away at their teeth, and some will even develop ulcers because of that metal. There's a brand that I actually have nothing to do with this brand, but I see their posts often on Facebook. It's called Hey Chicks, and they have a lot of different slow feed options that seem pretty cool. Again, I have no connection to them whatsoever. They just seem cool. The other thing is when we have paddocks and we're putting out hay, utilize you. This is just a little side note that you can utilize this as exercise. If you have a fat horse and you're trying to decrease their body weight, you can, put everything in their paddock in different pocket corners, so they have to move around in order um, to get to each of those necessities, and that it's forced exercise. So we know that hay can be a source of energy and protein and vitamins and minerals. We know, though, that even the best quality hay is only about 50% digestible, and it's not going to provide most of the minerals that our horses need, like copper, zinc, selenium, across the board are going to be deficient. Protein and energy may be sufficient depending on the what your horse is doing. It's maintenance or it's light exercise, and also depending on the quality of hay that you're feeding or the nutritional value of hay. And I'll get more into the quality versus nutritional value argument as we go on, because I actually consider those two things completely separate. Um, when it comes to hay, and I just want to talk very briefly about what makes good hay, because that's also going to determine hay alternatives like hay pellets or hay cubes. They really just come from the original hay. It's not floor sweepings or anything like that some myths say. But anyway, what determines good quality hay, or nutritional value? Stage of maturity. The younger the plant is, the less of that non-digestible fiber that it has in it. So it's got more available nutrients. So the older a plant is, or the more mature it is, the more the plant is upright. And so what holds it upright is its kind of skeleton, which is that non-digestible fiber. Um, that plays into cutting. So typically first cutting hay is more mature before we can get out into the fields to cut it. So it'll have sometimes a lesser nutritional availability. Growing conditions, soil fertility, water, drying conditions. Um, these all go into the nutritional value of the hay, but also the amount of cuttings. If it's constantly raining, then we can't get multiple cuttings because we just can't cut the hay. If there's not enough water, then we have a drought and we're only getting one, maybe two cuttings. Um, and then obviously alfalfa versus grass hay. Alfalfa is a legume and it's typically going to be higher in protein and calories and calcium than a grass hay. The other thing is that alfalfa is typically lower in sugars and starches. The only thing that we always recommend that you evaluate the hay. As little or as much as you have, evaluate your hay because that's what builds your diet. That is the basis to any horse's diet is the forage that we have available to them. By just looking at it, there are only a few things that you can determine though. Like you can look at it and see and you can smell it. And if it smells a bit off or it smells like mold or it's dusty and you're coughing while you're smelling it, then that would be bad for horses. Um, if it's got a lot of stem versus leaf, then typically it's probably more mature. If it's an alfalfa and all the leaf has fallen off, then we call that leaf shatter, and a lot of the nutrients is gone with the leaf, which is now on the ground and not in your hay. Um, if it's a grass hay and it's got a lot of seed head, then it's gone to seed, which we know with any plant, like your lettuce, when it bolts and it goes to seed, well, that's yuck. Nobody wants to eat it anymore. It's mature and it's bitter. And the same thing with grasses. That's how they reproduce. Is they will eventually produce that seed head, and that plant is then very mature, and all of the nutrients has gone into the seed head, so that then those seeds can make new plants. So if it's gone to seed, then it's got less nutritional value. The color in hay is a pretty much a good indicator of vitamin A and vitamin E. So as hay loses its color, it loses vitamin A and vitamin E. But another great thing that we've done with Pool and Grain is we know that a lot of our horses eat shedded stored forages and that they don't have high vitamin A and vitamin E in them. So we've added extra to the feeds, and the vitamin E that we put in all of the Pool and Grain equine feeds is 100% natural vitamin E, which is 4 times more bioavailable than synthetic. This is just a little bit about, and when we're talking about a hay shortage, it's important to not discard certain hays that may not look brilliant to you. So, but what do we discard? So green hay, there's usually no problem with it. It was cut at the best time. Um, Light gold and yellow on the outside of the bale typically means it was sun bleached. Maybe it decreases palatability a tiny bit. Um, but it's typically just we're decreasing that vitamin A and vitamin E, but it's not a problem at all. I would not discard that. That's why you'll also notice when people do a hay test, they'll core all the way into the bale because they're really not just eating the outside of the bale. If you break the bale open and you see that it's yellow or dull throughout the bale, but it doesn't smell bad or anything, it's usually just a little over mature when it was cut. So that's what the grass looked like when it was cut. The older grass gets a little bit more pale. Decrease in palatability a little bit because we are driving up those non digestible fiber fractions. Now, if it's dark brown or any black spots exposed to rain, heavy dew, or fog, and that is going to an increase mold growth, and we absolutely do not want to feed that to horses. So when you get Pool and Grain to come out to your property, one of the best things they can do for you is to do a hay test. And they're going to do that, like I said, with that hay probe, and it's going to go all the way into the bale, and they're going to sample several bales, and they're going to take a collective sample of that, and they're going to send it to their in-house forage testing lab and send you back a hay report. Because, like I mentioned, we can't look at hay and determine its copper or zinc value or its selenium or what its protein or energy levels are. We can only do that with chemical analysis in a lab, and that's really, really important. Um, Folks, if you don't use someone like Pool and Grain to do a test for you, there is another kind of public forage testing lab called Equa Analytical in Ithaca, New York, but you would have to pay the typical price that I pay for a complete sample, if I'm just doing a local sample for someone in a different area of the country, um, would be about $30 is about average, and that's going to give you a fairly complete overview. But if you want a really more in-depth overview, you can pay anywhere from $50 to $80. But so you're looking at $30 plus the cost of shipping your sample there. So it's great that you have that service available to you through Pool and Grain, that they will do that for free. When we get these hay tests back, though, you're going to look at it and think, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I use this to determine whether my hay is any good? All these numbers don't mean anything to me. The first number I look at is the moisture content, because if the moisture content is too high, like I said, that increases the risk for mold. You can also stick a thermometer. So if we have a high moisture content, then I would go out and I would be putting a thermometer, a temperature probe in, and checking the temperature. And if we're getting, we've all heard that terrible scenario of hay being baled slightly damp and stacked, and it goes on fire at around 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature of those bales. You can really increase your risk for fire. Um, so the other values that you might have on your forage analysis, you might have two columns of numbers, and you're like, well, which ones do I use? We have dry matter values and as sampled values. When we're looking at a hay test, they're going to be fairly similar, because I remember I said that a hay is primarily dry matter. So how we get that dry matter value is you take whatever the sample is, whether it's grass or hay or grain, and you put it in an oven and you take all of the water out of it. So there's no more moisture in that sample, and we've just got the dry matter left. And then we're going to now analyze that, and they would be dry matter values. Typically, though, when I'm building a ration, I won't use that value because I'm not cooking all of your horse's feed. Neither are you. You're feeding the hay as you get it. So on the as sampled value, or when you get a bag of feed, no one's cooking it. So those values are as fed values. So when I balance a ration, I use those as sampled or as fed values. Next, I'm going to look at the fiber fractions. This is going to tell me a lot about the palatability of the hay and the digestibility of the hay, and how much my horses might want to eat it or how much nutrients they're going to get out of it. When we're in a hay shortage, sometimes we have to take hays that are less than ideal when it comes to these fiber fractions. So um, ADF stands for acid detergent fiber. For me, this is a measure of digestibility. And as the ADF values increase, then that means the digestibility is decreasing. Neutral detergent fiber, or NDF, is a measure of palatability. So how likely are they um, to actually want to eat it? So if these values exceed 55% on that dry matter or 47% on the as fed, it means that the horses are probably going to back off on it a little bit. Now, is that a bad thing if we have a horse that just guts as their hay and you're really trying to slow them down? They're, a real easy keeper anyway, and I'm just trying to spread out the hay through the day. Finding a hay that has a slightly higher ADF and NDF value might actually be ideal for you, because they're not going to want to eat it really fast. But let's say we have a broodmare that is, she just throws everything into her baby, and every mouthful of food that she eats needs to be really digestible and available to her. Then a hay that with a really high ADF and NDF value might not be ideal for her. But if it's all you have available to you, that's fine. We just know the starting point. We know exactly where we're at, and we know what we need to add to the diet. Lignin is just completely non-digestible to the horse. Then we'll look at the sugar and starch content, right? These carbohydrate values. And these become very important if we're feeding horses with any sugar sensitivity or carbohydrate sensitivity, whether it be horses that tie up, horses that have a laminitis, obesity, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, Cushing's. Um, these would be all disease states where we would have to manage their sugar and starch intake. Ethanol soluble carbohydrates, it really just means in a lab you can break them down with ethanol. Water soluble carbohydrates in a lab, it just means you can break these ones down with water. Um, and ethanol soluble carbohydrates is what we consider sugar. Water soluble carbohydrates is sugar plus fructan. And then non-structural carbohydrates, which is the value that most of us hear about. Our diets need to be less than 10% non-structural carbohydrates if we're feeding a horse with obesity or laminitis or, kind of active metabolic issues. It's the combination of water-soluble carbohydrates and starch. When you get a feed tag and it simply says sugar and starch, it's because feeds these fructan, that is a component of water-soluble carbohydrates, is only in cool season grasses. So if your feed is alfalfa meal and soy hulls and soybean meal, and it doesn't have timothy or any other cool season grass in it, then it's really not going to have any fructan in it. So using the sugar value is completely fine when we're looking at feeds. But when we're looking at hays, we really should be looking at WSC plus starch. I'll then look at digestible energy because, again, the higher the digestible energy value, the more calories that this animal's going to get. So if we're looking for weight maintenance or weight gain, or we've got a high performing athlete, I want to try and find a hay with a higher energy content. Now, it's okay if the hay that we have is low in energy. It just means that in this hay shortage, I've purchased X amount of hay. I've had the hay test done on it, and we know that it's a low in energy. So I'm going to have to make up the difference by adding a higher calorie feed. But in a year that, fingers crossed, we don't have a hay shortage and I have more availability of different types of hays and I can buy a hay with a higher energy content, then I will be able to choose a different feed. So that's why knowing what your hay is, you can build the perfect diet for your horses and not waste any money. The other big thing with what's been going on in the world in the pandemic, I've been answering a lot of questions about feeding on a budget. How do I feed my horses well, but not, break my bank? And how you do that is not wasting any extra nutrients or calories where they're not needed. So knowing exactly what you're getting from your hay and building a diet around that will save you buku dollars. Crude protein is another value I look at, and local grass hay and local New England grass hay, we can get down, from 6 to 8% sugar, carbohydrate. What am I saying? Protein. But for a good local grass hay, we're looking 8 to 14% protein. A mixed hay about 12 to 16, and an alfalfa hay is going to run above 16% crude protein. Fat is not a source. Is about less than 3% in forages, so we don't consider fat really when we're looking at these hay tests. Now I have these values up here, and people would look down the high quality value and think, oh, I want my hay, I've got a grass hay and it needs to have a 12 to 14% crude protein and a 0.95 to zero point 0.9 um, digestible energy content for it to be high quality. Yes, high quality. uh, and I really need to take the word quality away from that, because nutritional value does not equal quality. Let's just say you're feeding a fat laminitic pony, then low nutritional value is better quality for him. And we're feeding a lactating broodmare, high nutritional value is good quality for them. So, um, when we're in a hay shortage, actually, when we are trying to find a hay that meets the needs of the masses, a hay that has lower nutritional value can sometimes be easier to work with in a boarding stable because we can always put more on top, but you can't take away. So if we think about alfalfa, for example, it's high in protein and energy and calcium. It's very low in sugars and starches. So it's great for broodmares. It's great for growing horses. It's great for any high performing athletes that need a lot of extra calories. It's not great for a fat laminitic pony. It's too many calories. I can't physically feed it 1.5% of its body weight without it turning into the Goodyear blimp. So alfalfa would not be good quality for a fat pony. Um, Timothy grass forage, moderate protein and energy. Again, this is really going to be dictated by the growing conditions, but typically low in starch, but can be higher in sugars and starches, also high in fiber. Orchard grass, similar to Timothy, slightly higher nutrient value, but more similar to Timothy compared to alfalfa. Now, when we get into this hay shortage, we want to start talking about the different forms of forage that are available. So we can think of typical conventional bales. A lot of us in the Northeast don't have access to these mega bales, these three string, 100-pound bales that are more common in California or the West Coast. But our typical conventional bale, let's say, is a 40-pound bale. Then we have compressed bales. So we take that 40-pound bale and we squeeze it down so we can fit it into the back of our Prius. And sometimes we even wrap plastic around it so it's not putting dust everywhere. Then we have hay cubes, hay pellets, chopped hay. And is there a difference between all of these forms? And the only difference is chopped forage. So we take that long stem hay and we literally run it through a scissor machine. It's chopping that up into shorter fiber lengths. Doesn't change the nutrient profile at all. The only way the nutrient profile might be changed is if people spray oil or molasses onto it. And they may do that just to keep the dust down. Sometimes we spray a little oil onto these chopped forages just to maintain really nice color. So that might slightly add to the calories, but it's certainly not going to change the digestibility at all. So when we take baled hay and to compressed hay, like I said, you just squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. If you take baled hay to cubes, you're just chopping it, coarsely grinding it, adding a little heat and steam, and sometimes a binding agent. When you take baled hay to pellets, you're grinding it finer, more heat, more steam, more pressure, and pushing it through a die. But when we take that baled hay to chop, you're just chopping it up, sometimes adding molasses or oil. So at no point here are we changing the nutritional profile. We're not changing the digestibility. And remember, even the best quality hay is only 50% digestible. So you take best quality orchard grass, it's 50% digestible or less, and you chop it up into orchard grass chop, it's still 50% digestible. You grind it and you squeeze it into a cube, it's still 50% digestible. You grind it even further and you squeeze it into a pellet, it's still 50% digestible, and it still has the same protein content, it still has the same energy content, and it still has the same nutrient content. It's just in a different physical form. Now, that physical form might make it easier for the horse to actually swallow and chew. Let's say they have really bad teeth. That still doesn't change the digestibility in the hindgut. Just means they can actually get it into their body. Um, it's also convenient, right? You can um, store it in less area. Most of these products are available at your local feed store, so it's easy to just whip down to the store whenever you run out and get it. You don't have to store it anywhere. Um, Ideally, it's great. Yeah, it'd be great. We get a tractor trailer load of hay from the West Coast, or we buy it from Canada. We go in with our friends and we each store a boatload of hay each. But that's expensive and that's a lot of money that I've now tied up in hay that's just sitting, it's great because you can usually get a discount by doing that. But if you're on a budget, sometimes our budget doesn't allow for us to just sink a bunch of money into an inanimate object that's just going to sit there and do nothing for us. So, getting back to good quality versus poor quality versus nutritional value. And if I was in front of you all, I would ask you to raise your hand. And most people, when I ask what is good quality, people say it's green, it's leafy, it's high in nutritional value. Um, but again, that's not always the case. I always start with bad quality. What is bad quality? It is absolutely always the same. And it doesn't matter whether it's a round bale, a compressed bale, a pellet, a cube. It's dirty, it's dusty, it's moldy, it's got weeds in it, string, dead animals, any kind of contaminant. That is always bad. Good is what is appropriate for your horse. Lactating broodmare versus 3-day event horses versus lemonitic pony, easy keeper. We kind of went through the scenario of what might be good for a lemonitic pony versus a lactating broodmare. And so it's what's appropriate for your horse. Even further than that, in a hay shortage, it's what do I have available to me that I can build my diet from? It's just all about knowing what you're starting with. Now, I will tell you, if your way of battling a hay shortage is to feed less, this is what's going to happen. So this was a study where they had 36 horses. They were 3-year-olds, and they put them on 2 diets. The HF diet stood for high fiber. So they gave them haylage in this because it's a European study. And so they gave them a boatload of haylage and just a little bit of grain concentrate. The low fiber diet, they had a lot more grain concentrate, 4-to-1 grain concentrate to the haylage. And on the chart, which we'll go to now, the gray bars represent the high fiber diet and the white bars are the low fiber diet. I'm going to read this graph backwards. We're going to go all the way to the end. I'm going to look at those two bars and see the words underneath say eating total. So the total amount of time that it took the horses in both groups, didn't matter whether you gave them a lot of fiber in their diet or not a lot of fiber, when observed eating, just eating, period, there was no difference in the time that it was taken to eat. Now let's come back to the beginning of the graph and we'll start to look a little deeper into what were they actually eating. So now we're timing how long it took for them to eat the ration we gave them. Now, what we just looked at was eating total. That was them chewing anything in the stall, bedding, feces, the wall, the blanket, just eating anything. Now we're looking at how long it took them to eat the ration we gave them. And it makes sense. So the gray bars represent the high fiber group. It takes a lot longer to chew down hay than it does to just eat some grain concentrate. So the high fiber diet, they spent more time eating what we gave them. So what on earth made up the difference? Well, if you go now to the middle of the graph, this is the telltale here. The white bars, which are the low fiber group, they spent the rest of their time eating bedding and feces, and that's just unhealthy. If you're bedding on straw or shavings, that can cause impaction colic and it's going to increase parasites. But what it shows us is that horses crave fiber and they will get it even if you don't supply it for them. So if we're trying, so what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to feed our horses when we don't have enough hay? But I am drilling into you that they still need fiber. Okay, so let's look at this diet. We've got a maintenance horse. He's 1,000 pounds. He's not doing any work. He's eating currently 15 pounds of hay and a pound of E-Tech balancer. And the diet is balanced, right? We're looking at energy and protein and calcium and phosphorus and all those other goodies down the bottom. And all the bars are touching that red line, which means 100% of that requirement had been met. So this diet is what I would consider balanced. What does it take to do this though with that one horse? Okay, so let's just say we were feeding 1.5% of the horse's body weight. That's 15 pounds. I did this over winter because that's when we always have a hay shortage. This year it seems to be extending and extending, but um, you can take the word winter out of there and just say 5 months. For 5 months, that's 150 days at 15 pounds a day. That's a little over a ton of hay per horse. Now, I know that most of you have more than one horse. And let's say an average grass bale weighs about 40 pounds. That's a local grass bale. We're looking at 60 bales per horse. Okay, you've got 10 horses. That's 600 bales that you would need. And there's just no way that I can source that much hay, store that much hay, pay for that much hay in one sitting. So what do I do? This is where we have to look at these other alternatives, right? So we look at things like the pool and forage extender, or we're looking at alfalfa pellets or cubes or beet pulp shreds or soy hulls. And the first thing we jump to is, okay, what's the non-structural carbohydrate content? All of these are low. The forage extender runs around 9% sugars and starches, alfalfa, um, pellets usually around 10, beet pulp low, as long as it's non-molast, and soy hulls very, very low. All of these are very highly digestible. The forage extender, which is the pool and grain forage extender, comes in a small or a larger pellet size, nugget size. Um, and that larger nugget size can be great if you're wanting to feed out in the field and they can eat that off the ground. But it's made up of really highly digestible fiber sources, the soy hulls and dehydrated alfalfa meal. And so we're not, we've increased the digestibility now. I said that hay is even the best quality hay is only 50% digestible. But now when you add things like soy hulls, we're increasing the digestibility. So you're going to get more bang for your buck out of this. So let's just say we're feeding a local hay that's lower in digestibility and palatability, but we're taking some of that out and we're replacing it with the forage extender, which is more digestible. They're going to get more bang for their buck out of it, even though um, the forage extender might be a little bit more expensive. They're actually getting more out of it. So in the long run, it's less expensive. It's got no molasses in it. It's balanced for calcium and phosphorus. It's got 12% protein versus I mentioned our local grass hay might be 5 to 8% crude protein. It's got yeast culture in it that's also going to help with fiber digestion, a little flavoring to help with palatability. Um, Great for horses that don't have very good teeth because you can wet it, make a mash out of it, carbohydrate sensitive. And it's going to do two things with our hay shortage. It's going to extend the supply of the hay and it's going to improve maybe a lower nutritional value hay that we've got. So how do you feed it? Um, let's just say we're feeding out local hay, and we had the analogy before where we were feeding 15 pounds of it. That was getting me my 1.5% of body weight, which was the lower end, but that was my 15 pounds of actual dry matter that the horse needed to eat per day, my 1 pound of balancer. Well, now I don't have enough to give every horse in my barn 15 pounds. But if I break it down, I can give them 10 pounds a day. So I'm going to have to find 5 pounds from somewhere else. So I'm going to feed 5 pounds of forage extender. Now, I don't have to sink as much capital into buying hay or sourcing hay because now instead of it being a little over a ton, it's a lot less than that we're trying to source. And I don't have that capital just sitting in my hay room. Now I can just go down to the store every week, every other week, and buy forage extender or forage product. So it can be a little bit more uh, soft on your budget, let's say. But you can see that the diet is still balanced here. So it doesn't matter whether it's a forage shortage or we don't have good quality forage, it's still the most important part of their diet, and we have to find a way to get it to them. Absolutely don't go less than 1% of body weight. Um, your hay in the field, your local hay that you're buying, growth stage affects fiber content and digestibility and quality, nutritional value. Um, but by adding better quality fiber to the diet, if we can find it or source it, can help us decrease the grain, which helps us with our budget too in the long run. Because not only is there a hay shortage, hay that is available is probably going to go up in price. And we know that feed costs have gone up in price just because of commodity prices. It doesn't matter whether you're Pool and Grain or any grain company, feed prices have gone up. So all around, we're trying to kind of watch our pocketbook. So good quality hay because it's the predominant part of their diet, using these forage sources where we can, getting a hay test at the beginning to know exactly what we're dealing with, what we need to do, what we have to make up. So, any more questions?
Yeah. So we did get a question. Lori wants to know if you could talk a little bit about straight Timothy hay.
Okay, that's a great question, Lori, and I didn't delve into it because I know that these webinars can be kind of boring staring at your screen all night. But what I will say is that horses are not designed to eat a monoculture. If you go out into a field and you watch wild horses, they will eat a wide variety of different grasses and forbs and weeds and, twigs and things. And that's normal. And that's feeding that microbiome in the hindgut. It's feeding them and creating this cultural diversity, which is absolutely critical. So I don't recommend that people just feed one type of hay because I want a diversity in their gut. It's like with a senior horse, for example. We didn't touch on the complete feeds, which I knew was part of the title. And complete feed means that you don't have to feed any extra hay. The pitfall to a complete feed is that, okay, we're going to feed 15 to 20 pounds of it to get all the fiber into our horse. They're going to eat that really quickly because there's no long stem fiber in it. So what I like to do is, let's say senior feeds are a complete feed, for example. I like to add different fiber sources. I might add some alfalfa pellets. I might add some forage extender. I might add some extra beet pulp just to round out the variety of fiber. So back to your Timothy, I typically don't like to just feed one type of hay. That being said, if I wanted to feed an alfalfa mix to my horses, I would buy good alfalfa and I would buy good grass and I would mix them myself because the two plant types grow at different rates. And so it's very difficult to have a grass mix hay, grass alfalfa hay that is perfect timing on both those plants. I don't know whether that answered your question or not.
I think it answered the question. Jacqueline just posted saying that Hey Chicks is excellent, what you mentioned earlier. She
Yes.
said that she uses the nets all the time. I've personally never heard of them, but I'll have to check them out
Oh,
now.
you need to check them out because other people that buy the nets also post all these crazy pictures about how, just these ingenious ways that they have used these slow feed hay nets to, maybe put over a round bale or slow horses down. It's just people's pictures are great.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check them out. Mikey has a question. What would be a good hay choice for a horse with Cushing?
So for a horse with Cushing's, we're looking for now the first question that I always ask, whether it's Cushing's or any other metabolic disorder where we're trying to keep sugars and starches low, is the first question you always ask is the horse fat or thin? If the horse was thin, I'm always going to go with alfalfa. Alfalfa is going to provide the calories the horse needs, but keeping the sugars and starches low. If the horse is fat, then we're going to look more to a first cut, lower sugar starch hay. Um, and you can even source, there are some specialized hays that are somewhat limited, but teff is a hay variety that some people grow. But for a horse with Cushing's that was fat, I get the hay tested and I would have low sugars and starches and low nutritional value would be good quality hay for that horse.
Perfect. And I think that might be all the questions that we have. Lori did bring up a good point that, if you go by the cost per head per day, aspect of it, definitely forage extender could end up being a little bit cheaper for you. Plus, like she said, it helps keep her old girl chewing.
Absolutely, because when you look at the digestibility, like, okay, I can buy lower nutritional value hay cheaper, but I just make more manure, right? And especially if you've got an older horse that doesn't have great teeth, and we're just trying to make it more digestible so that what they're eating there is actually using and not just making more manure for me to pick up. So you're absolutely right. It can in the long run be more economical for you.
Perfect. It looks like
So Kevin, you came up with this
that's
question, your topic. Do you have any other questions? Because you get this comment a lot, I guess.
so. Yeah, I guess the only question that I have is, should there be any worry about a lack of the forage extender now, if there's going to be a lack of hay to begin with?
No, because we're sourcing, we have, bids in for the alfalfa that goes into it and the soy hulls that go into it. There's no shortage in soy hulls.
Perfect.
So no.
Yeah, that's the only question that I have. If nobody has any other questions, what we'll do is we'll quickly pick the winners of the free grain.
Excellent.
So, Dr. Tanya, if you want to do me a favor, if you want to pick three numbers between, let's see here, between 1 and 20.
Oh, where's my Oh, okay, let's go with 3, 10, and 15.
So 3 is John Bradley. 10 is Marcia Flagg. And what was the last one? 15?
Yep.
Valerie Pervo. Congratulations to you three. You guys won the free bag of grain. So I'll be sending you an email shortly. If there's no other questions, which it looks like we're good. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Tanya. We really appreciate you joining us today and really help, ease us into this crisis, essentially, of a panic of the lack of hay. So I think you
Mhm,
definitely helped
mhm.
put some horse owners at ease.
Well, a big shout out to you, Kevin, because you gave me the platform. All I do is talk all night. You actually set it up, so this is fantastic. And everybody that shops at Bay State, you obviously have a great store that's really looking out for your best interest. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I look forward to our next one, which I believe is going to be, is it in July? So
Yes, yes.
we'll be posting that one next too. So
Yay.
that'll be another fun one.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, again for joining us. If you have any other questions that you want me to forward over to Dr. Tanya, you can either comment here or you can, send me an email. But I hope you guys have a great night and don't panic about this hay shortage. And I will see you all later.